I'm excited to be here at Berkeley Castle today for several reasons. First of all, because it's a beautiful castle. Second of all, because it's not far from my home, only about 30 minutes from where we live in Cheltenham. And also because it is a place of very important British history. So I will be anxious to find out more about that and share it all with you. As an interesting side note, my husband Ian has been here before, but it was about 50 years ago, so he doesn't remember it too well. This site has been the home of the Berkeley family for nearly 900 years, which is fascinating. And they've managed to keep the castle, its contents, the archives, and the estate all together through those centuries, which is a remarkable accomplishment. Gloucestershire has many very old manor houses and grand estates, but Berkeley Castle is the oldest building in the county to be inhabited by the same family who built it. This aristocratic family has been closely associated with the monarchy for centuries. The archives of the castle date back to 1154, and throughout the castle are items of historic interest, such as this, Francis Drake's cabin chest. But Berkeley is also an architecturally beautiful castle, with a 60-foot drop from the towers to the lower Great Lawn below. And all around the castle you find courtyards, battlements, towers, doors, and windows that are interesting in their shape and size. The first recorded castle at Berkeley was probably built around 1070 in the Motte and Bailey style. Berkeley was built as a defensive fortress to keep out the Welsh, and known as a march castle because it's a fortification. It had trip steps, arrow slits, murder holes, massive barred doors, and a portcullis. Berkeley Castle is a combination of military fortress and beautiful place. It even has some magenta roses. The estate is over 6,000 acres, including a medieval deer park, 18 tenant farms, and expansive wildfowl and wetlands areas. It extends to the River Severn. But the bit of history that drew me to Berkeley was the murder of King Edward II. So let's go to take a peek at, as they say in the musical Hamilton, which I'll be seeing in London this week, the room where it happened. Oh, look, we found a little hidden passageway. At the entrance to the castle are these wonky stairs, which were part of the castle defenses. Because the steps are all of different heights, they would throw off intruders storming the castle, making them trip and fall. The stone is Cotswold stone and red sandstone, which is why you see all this beautiful pinkish hue to the castle. The Berkeley family is one of only 3 landed families in England who can trace their ancestry generation to generation back to Saxon times. Their unbroken male line leads back to Eadnoth the Staller, or the master of the king's horses, under Edward the Confessor. The Berkeleys are one of the oldest and most prominent noble families in England. The first recorded member of the family was granted land by William the Conqueror. In the late 11th century, this castle was built by William de Berkeley. The title of Baron Berkeley was created in the 14th century, and during the Tudor period, the family was very influential, though they did have some rivalries with other noble houses. Thankfully, the current family lives in calmer times, and the family members these days work diligently to preserve the history and heritage of this significant castle for future generations. Here in the King's Gallery is an impressive collection of portraits, including King George I, King James II, King Charles I and II, King William III, Queen Mary II, King James I, as well as some Berkeley barons. Several more barons are featured in this picture gallery staircase. And the interesting portraits continue in Drake's room, a room named after Sir Francis Drake. We don't know for sure if Drake visited the castle and stayed in this room, but the room does feature some lovely furnishings and artifacts from the Elizabethan era. You don't usually see a woman from that era holding a revolver. If you are enjoying this video, please take a moment to click the subscribe button. Cheers! This dining room really caught my attention. I thought it was fascinating to learn more about specific members of the Berkeley family through the centuries and get to know them as individuals. The tower room is in one of the oldest parts of the castle, the keep or central tower. This room has very thick stone walls and small windows, indicative of its origin as a fortress. This room is linked to the most famous story connected with Berkeley Castle, that of the death of King Edward II. Edward II was king for 20 years until his deposition in 1327. He was never meant to be king, born the fourth son of King Edward I to Eleanor of Castile. When his older brothers died before him, he inherited the throne after his father's death in 1307. He is infamous for being a pretty terrible king, ruling through favorites, choosing favored people from his court and giving these ambitious, greedy, and often corrupt men a lot of power and influence. He married Isabella, daughter of the King of France. The marriage didn't go well. While she was visiting Paris, she met Roger Mortimer, a Marcher lord who had fled England after he had led a revolt against the king. Isabella and Roger became lovers, and the two of them carried out a successful invasion and rebellion. They captured King Edward and forced him to relinquish his throne to his son Edward III, who was only about 14 years old. This conveniently provided Mortimer with the opportunity to be de facto king for a few years. The deposed Edward II was banished to Berkeley Castle. At first, he lived quite comfortably on the ample allowance of £5 a day, a rather luxurious amount back in 1327. But he was a prisoner. After a brief escape, he was recaptured and brought back to the castle, where he was held captive in this room, with heightened security. Then rumors began circulating of another imminent escape. Some historians believe that Mortimer then planned Edward's murder to be carried out here in Berkeley Castle. He did most likely die in 1327, but there are at least 3 theories as to what happened. Probably the most popular story was that he was killed using a red-hot poker in a most unsavory way. There's another theory that he was suffocated in his bed, a method that would also leave little trace of foul play and murder. After his death, his body was taken to Gloucester Cathedral, and I have often visited the gate by which his body entered the city and his tomb within the cathedral. I highly recommend a visit to the cathedral if you come to visit Berkeley Castle. In the description, I will link to my Gloucester Cathedral video. The third theory is that he wasn't killed at all, but actually escaped. And in fact, another man's body is buried in his tomb. But if you believe that, you probably also believe Elvis is still alive. During the English Civil War, which began in 1642 between King Charles I and Parliament, led by Oliver Cromwell, George, 8th Baron Berkeley, who held the family seat at Berkeley Castle, spent most of his time in London, politically maneuvering between the royalists and the parliamentarians. Meanwhile, the castle, as a strategic stronghold between Bristol and Gloucester, changed hands between the two armies no less than 5 times. By 1645, the castle was back in royalist hands, and the castle was stormed by parliamentarian soldiers. The Gloucester County Committee desired to demolish Berkeley Castle, but George, the 8th Baron Berkeley, fought against this decision, claiming that he'd already lost £20,000 in the Civil War, including £3,000 worth of damage to the castle itself. The castle was restored to Baron Berkeley on the understanding that it would be made defenseless. So in 1646, men from around Berkeley were brought in to take down the keep wall so the castle would never again be used as a fortress, and other weapons and defenses were confiscated by Parliament. Now let's tour the Larders. The first is called the Tapestry Larder. This room used to be used for storing food because it's nice and cool, but now it's where These huge, beautiful tapestries are kept because it's cool all year long. The next is the Jenner larder, which has lovely paintings of various properties owned by the Berkeley family. This room is named after Dr. Edward Jenner. Edward Jenner was the local doctor for Berkeley and lived in the chantry next to the chapel. In 1796, he completed his first experiment to find out the effect of cowpox as a vaccine to prevent smallpox. The experiment was a success, and Jenner had discovered vaccination. His work is described as saving more lives than any other man on earth. His house is next door, and you're able to go visit it, although we don't have time to do so today. This is the buttery, according to the sign, but to me it looks like the kitchen. Although I just noticed that the actual kitchen is nearby, so I'll go there next. At first I thought these bells were like what you see in manor houses where the family rings a bell in different rooms for the servants to come assist them, but that's not what this is. These are carriage bells that were used on horses' harnesses around 1800. On foggy days, the bells were used to warn others of their approach. This is a old-timey aga. Got those beautiful copper cookware. I'm always fascinated by old sinks. Looks like we have some very old sinks and some modern-day food-serving devices, probably for the many weddings that happen here at Berkeley Castle. This archway style is specifically called the Berkeley Arch because it is unique to their properties. The kitchen at Berkeley Castle is a glimpse into the domestic life of generations past. It has been in continuous use for over 800 years. During the Middle Ages, it was an essential part of the castle where large banquets, feasts, and meals for royalty were prepared. The kitchen would have had a large staff assigned to specific roles such as roasting, baking, and serving. They would have been responsible for serving not only the Berkeley family, but also soldiers, guests, and other castle staff. The huge fireplaces were the heat sources for cooking and roasting food. Open hearths would be used for roasting meats, and the roasting spit would be used to prepare large game or meat dishes. One interesting thing about this room is its ceiling. It's called the kitchen cobweb ceiling. This is the china room where their fancy china is on display. Let's take a quick look at some of the pieces I found interesting in this collection. An ice pail with a little magenta cupid on it. Delftware plates from the 1700s. Fox hunting. This dinner service was made in China around 1750 for John Berkeley, 5th Lord Berkeley. It has the Berkeley coat of arms. Here is an artifact of dubious origin, so we probably have not found the Holy Grail. This is the housekeeper's room. Pretty nice digs. This is an Albert Dürer painting. And this is a facsimile of Queen Elizabeth's alms purse, which was made by several ladies of Berkeley. I don't know when, but it looks very old. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, but I like it this way. This is Robert Cheeseman, who was falconer to King Henry VIII. And here's another Berkeley arch doorway. This is the Great Hall, always a fun place to visit in any castle or large manor house. The very best thing about Berkeley Castle was that I got to play dress up and convince Ian to go along with it. He's such a good sport. I go on hikes up mountains with him, and he poses for goofy photos when I need them for a video. This is a custom-made bath chair that was thought to be owned by Randall, the 8th Earl of Berkeley. It allowed the Earl to navigate his large estate and overcame his mobility issues. Bath chairs were created in Bath in the mid-18th century specifically to transport invalids. Berkeley Castle is one of those places where everywhere you turn there are grand things, from staircases to intricately carved doors. This ancient door really grabbed my attention, and I loved looking at all the carvings. Here is the Earl of Berkeley in 1780. This is how I feel after having eaten a full afternoon tea. They have recently been filming Wolf Hall here, which is why some of the decor has been altered for filming. This is the morning room, which has some tapestries, some more Berkeley arches, and a very old Bible, and some biblical stuff going on the ceiling that I'm still trying to figure out. This used to be the chapel and had inscriptions painted along the top of the ceiling about the apocalypse, the Revelation of John. This is a book of musical chants from the 1400s. And this is an early edition of the King James Bible from the 1640s. And the chapel would not be complete without a narwhal tusk, of course. This is my favorite room, the long drawing room. This is where they would retire after eating in the Great Hall. The furniture's 300 years old. Ooh, this chair's very nicely preserved.
This is Georgina Berkeley, who lives in the castle today.
And this is the dress she wore for the portrait in the 1980s. It was made by Givenchy. This is the small drawing room and has another interesting fireplace and massive tapestries. The beams in this room are just massive. It's believed that these beams were all put here so that the room could hold a massive artillery station above it. A bit of over-engineering. It is fun to be in a home that's been in a family for nearly 900 years and then see these photos of the current family just as a reminder of the legacy that they're upholding by caretaking this estate. Here's Tracy descending into the dungeon. It is quite cool down here.
It is.
Like temperature cool.
Wow.
Ah, it's the cellar where you keep your casks of ale. It's interesting to see the old notes of their inventories that they did back in the 1800s of the wine down here. This is the castle, big door, little door. There are expansive gardens to wander at Berkeley, including the kitchen garden and some lovely fountains and passages and huge green lawns. As you learned if you watched my garden center video with Tracy, she is an avid gardener, so of course we enjoyed wandering through the gardens. If you haven't seen our visit to Burford, one of the best garden centers in Britain, be sure to check that out in the description as well. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. On a personal note, I'll tell you a quick funny story about our visit to Berkeley Castle. As it says in the signage here near the car park, there are a couple American connections to the castle. One is that English settlers from Berkeley arrived in the Jamestown area of the colonies in 1619, and Sir William Berkeley was made governor of Virginia in 1641. The other connection is that George Berkeley, Bishop of Cloyne, went to America to set up a college. Eventually, that became the University of California, Berkeley. and I just so happened to have attended uni at Berkeley's bitter rival. And even more coincidental is that when I visited Berkeley Castle on this day, there happened to be an alumni group from my alma mater going through the castle on a guided tour. I thought that was hilarious. It was great to finally come to the historic Berkeley Castle and see the place where Edward II was allegedly murdered. If you are interested in him, I really encourage you to go visit Gloucester Cathedral to see his tomb and just to see a really magnificent English cathedral. Thanks so much for watching this video, and do something good in the world today.